today of Africa, what we would think of as Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco. This is what most scholars are talking about when they say North Africa, because in the Roman Empire, this is a map that kind of shows some of the provinces as Romans would see it. Egypt was sort of its own unique place, its own unique culture. But if you look to the middle of that map, the area named Africa, that's the actual province that the Romans called Africa. The technical name was Africa Proconsularis. And it was thought to be named after a people group that ancient prehistoric Romans ran into, called the Afri, the Africans. And so the region became known by that. But even though there was one province known by this, and you have all these other provinces alongside it, it was also common to speak of the whole continent, the whole region, as Africa. So anyone from this whole side of North Africa would be called Africans. I've also got this word, you see Libya at the bottom. That's not talking about modern Libya. That the Greek writers from the Greco-Roman period tended to call everything beyond Egypt to the west Libya. And so what they would call Libya, the Romans would call Africa, and sometimes these words are interchangeable. But we're going to see this actually comes up in it can be seen in even our early Christian sources from this area. If you go to North Africa today, you'll see lots of evidence of Romanization, Roman colonization. This is the amphitheater that was built in Carthage. This is the exact site where Perpetua and Felicity were martyred. You can visit these sites today because they're hardly really attended to. This is another amphitheater further south in Tunisia that the floor has been rebuilt, so you can kind of get a sense of the scope and the power of Rome in these places. It would have been formidable. But if you go, you also find that it's not just ancient Roman military sites and colonization sites. You find a lot of Christian sites, like this ancient Christian basilica. And just to even give you a sort of a sense of how many there are, I've taken that map I showed you before, that what I've put in a square there at the bottom. One early French archaeologist, I say early modern French archaeologist named Duval, tried to document all the known Christian church buildings in just this one region of North Africa. And it's hard to see all the little dots there, so I've kind of tried to highlight them. That's not 100% accurate, because there's even more than I could put with those dots. These are simply the known church sites in this portion of North Africa. We know from literary texts hundreds more that just haven't survived, and how many more were meeting from house to house or in church buildings that didn't survive for whatever reason. So when you go to think of, like, if you were to go to North Africa, or you think of the landscape of North Africa, you should think of it as thoroughly Christianized. So just to give a very rough outline of our history, long before the Christian era, this part of North Africa is colonized by the Punic Empire, and that's what we would think of as Phoenician from Old Testament literature. The Romans or Latins called them Punics, and you remember the Punic Wars and Hannibal marching his elephants over the Alps. Eventually, Rome conquers the Punic Empire and colonizes North Africa beginning in 146 BCE. And Rome rules throughout the Christian era until there's a short time where what we normally think of as the fall of Rome and the fall of the Western Roman Empire. The Vandals invade in the 400s. They rule for 100 years until the Byzantines reconquered. And we call them Byzantines. At the time, they would have been called Romans. They're ruling from Constantinople until the time of the spread of Islam. And around 700, that's when we see Western North Africa begin to be conquered by the Arab armies. And at that point, we start to see a pretty steep decline in Western North African Christianity, and eventually its disappearance. So that's just a rough outline. But if you're to think about what you see in the Western North African regions for Christianity, I like to compare it to things like what Dr. Bantu just talked about in Egypt. Many other people are studying Syriac Christianity from ancient times. There's still a Syriac church today that speaks Syrian. So if you were to go to ancient Syria, you would expect to find what would appear to us as a somewhat exotic and foreign expression of Christianity. Or in Egypt, in Coptic Christianity and Ethiopian Christianity, if you were to study the sources, you would expect there to be something unique about the culture there that's expressed even in the Christian sources. And that's because they're speaking in their own unique languages. Well, the problem when you do this with the North African Christian writers is that they're all writing in Latin. And so this has just made it far too easy for Western European scholars to assume that they're all Latin Romans. And in a sense, they are Latin. They're Latin speakers. In a sense, they're Romans. They're the member of the Roman Empire. But in another sense, there's also just as much unique African culture and expression found in these sources, if you know what to look for. So those historical periods I gave you, I think it's fascinating that what happens is you just add layer upon layer. So the very last period, we think of a sharp break between Christianity and Islam, when in fact we've discovered mosques from North Africa that have icons of Jesus in them, which you're not supposed to do in traditional Islam. But in these early overlaps of the different people groups and cultures, you can see how much this was originally a church that was simply converted to a mosque. When you think of North African writers from the region I'm talking about, many people would know some of these names. These are some of the most influential Christian writers from the ancient church in general. Tertullian, Cyprian, especially Augustine. Most people have heard of Augustine. They're all North African writers. These images, there's a lot to be said about these images, by the way. They're all from the internet. Tertullian has never been pictured in antiquity. So here's someone drew him as very grumpy, and that's probably true of his personality. But in addition to these sort of well-known writers, there are dozens and dozens of other African writers, Christian writers. These are just some of the key examples.